I don't know that you've ever listened to a story about, black people's relationships with dogs. Is there a lot of content online for that? In my lifetime, I have seen an enormous change in black people's relationship with dogs. We always had dogs, and we had dogs in our yard. Even back then, we were bringing dogs, allowing the dogs inside. Occasionally, I would sneak them up on the couch. My black friends, in contrast, found the idea of a dog being in a house just, what are you, crazy? They're dirty, they're filthy, they're dogs, that's an animal, man. Animals don't belong in the house. Don't even tell them that you were sleeping with a dog, you're right? Literally, sleeping with dogs is an old adage. Sleeping with dogs, you're gonna get fleas. So part of that kind of thinking that, dogs are dirty animals, they don't belong in a house. In your bed, get out of here, right? Kissing on your dog, all that kind of crazy stuff. That was white people stuff. Black people don't do. Black people got too much sense to be treating dogs like that. We put that love and affection into our kids, not dogs like these crazy white people, right? Look at you now. Y'all are as crazy about dogs as white people ever were. And I see black men with more dogs than I have ever seen before in my life. I don't only see them with the tough dogs. I don't only see them with kind of Corsos and Great Danes and Pit Bulls, and I don't only see them with the big dogs. I love seeing, a big, strong black man with a small dog. I love it, and him being affectionate. I love seeing that. What a long way we've come. I mean, even back, the other thing is that white people were reputed to smell like wet dogs, right? Yeah, so now y'all are sleeping with the wet dog. Oh, Lord. Lord help me. Dogs. I have owned dogs for all of my life. I cannot remember a time in my life that I did not have a dog. I have learned so many things. Dogs have given me far more than I've ever given them. And I can't tell you a fraction of what they've given me because they've taught me dog things that aren't people things. Dog lessons, many things that they will teach you, you don't even know you've been taught. It hurt me to see my black friends being afraid of dogs, because I knew how powerful they were as a companion, as a teacher, as a protector, as a confidant, as all those things that dogs can be. My black friends were generally being deprived of. And a lot of that relationship that black people had with dogs had some very painful and traumatic roots. And it got me thinking back about where those roots were and how much the relationship between black people and black men in particular has changed over the last 200 years. They've gone from, tools of oppression to beloved family members. So this is a story of that fear, the resilience, and ultimately, where we find ourselves today, companionship. So let's go back about 200 years, and in the Antebellum South, played two roles. They were weapons of terror to slaves. You knew that if you ran away, that before long, in the distance, you were going to hear those yapping bloodhounds hot on your trail, being followed by some really angry men with guns. And that sound still echoes in the cultural memory of black men in particular, barking in the distance of that dog, chasing you. You knew it. On the other hand, they were also working dogs on the plantations themselves. They had roles. They were also hunting animals, so that if you were not someone who was inclined to run away and you were just going to accept your fate on the plantation and kind of do your job, one of the jobs might have been taking care of the dogs. One of the jobs may have been, using the dogs on hunts. All the kinds of hunting in the South that was a regular practice at the time, many of those hunts included dogs. So even in these dark times, enslaved people formed functional bonds with working dogs. As we stumbled through Reconstruction into the Jim Crow era, dogs remained symbols of intimidation for many Black Americans. Economic hardship meant it was hard enough to put food on the table for you and your family. So feeding a dog, even scraps were held on. We did leftovers. So economic hardship meant that had a luxury that few Black people could afford. But in rural areas, after Reconstruction, Black farmers were increasingly relying on dogs for hunting and herding. They had seen the functional value that they had on these plantations as tools, as working animals, and so they adopted some of those practices and began to use them for hunting and herding on their own farms. Fast forward to the Civil Rights era, we took a bit of a left turn here. The relationship between dogs and Black men in particular had been improving since emancipation. But we fast forward to the Civil Rights era 100 years later, and all of a sudden we're regressing in that relationship. Dogs are used as attack dogs by police to turn them against protesters, and there are so many images from that era. You can probably recall some very scary and traumatic images of German Shepherds in particular, being used to control Black people during protests. And I have 3 or 4 images that immediately come to mind that just really vivify this terror Black people must have felt whenever a dog came around, because it was so associated with these painful traumas that were distributed across the media. So these events may have been concentrated in Selma or Montgomery or other sites where these famous images were taken. They may have been localized there, but they were distributed nationally. The whole world got to see these images, and by extension, they became traumatized and absorbed some of those same kinds of fears of dogs. If you were a Black person anywhere, even if that didn't happen in your backyard, you saw how dogs were being used. These scenes reinforced trauma and solidified dogs as symbols of white authority in many Black communities. Now, when we get to the 70s and 80s, in the decades that followed, a gradual shift began. The Black middle class is starting to grow, and so did dog ownership. About that time, our numbers on dog ownership aren't great, but let's assume that in the early 1900s that it probably may have been 10%, largely due to economic factors. But when we get to the 90s, we actually do have some numbers. And in the 90s, about 1/4, 24% of all Black households owned dogs. And it would only rise from there. And hip hop was a big factor in that. When hip hop rose during the 1990s, it really marked a turning point. Artists like DMX brought dogs, especially pit bulls, into the cultural spotlight. His love for dogs was legendary. He referred to himself as a dog in his music, and his albums frequently featured pit bulls on the covers. Bars, dogs are the best judges of character. You can't fool dogs. They know who you really are. DMX is championing, and praising dogs as companions, as symbols of this newfound confidence and strength that particularly young urban Black men were beginning to feel as hip hop emboldened the culture. And the dog, in particular pit bulls, with the associations of their aggressiveness and their muscularity and their strength and their loyalty and their determination, these became, the kinds of attributes that DMX aligned himself with in the dog nature that was becoming popularized in Black culture. This shift helped transform the images of dogs from threats to loyal companions, especially in urban Black communities. But every story has its twists and turns, and the story of dog was ready to take another turn. Here we are on this ascendant path and growing affection and love and bringing dogs into the home. Michael Vick in 2007, Michael Vick's dogfighting charges shocked the nation. And in the next year, DMX faced animal cruelty charges for the way some of his dogs were being treated, I believe, in a house in Arizona. Now, these high-profile cases sparked intense debates outside of the Black community and within the Black community about the treatment of dogs and responsible pet ownership. And I really feel that this was a tipping point where people really took a hard look at dogs in a way that they had not before. And it shifted behavior for the better. So much so that in the years since then, we've seen a remarkable evolution. Today, since that roughly 25% of Black people having dogs in the 90s, our most recent numbers show that almost half of Black households own pets. And I'm guessing that dogs make a significant portion of that. They're no longer just guards or status symbols, but they're beloved family members, providing emotional support and companionship and all those wonderful things that people who love dogs have always known. And now that gift is more present in Black households throughout the country. And I think, it's can't help but be a positive factor in homes that have dogs across many dimensions. We know, for example, that dogs help build the immune system of young children. Yeah, dogs can be dirty. And humans can be dirty too. All creatures' life is dirty, I promise you. But dogs bring their own kind of bacteria and other kinds of pathogens into the home that the human has to respond to, the human immune system responds to. And so it fortifies the human system to contend with these things, and it makes stronger, more resilient immune systems, which typically lead to stronger and more resilient and healthy children. So that's one of the benefits of dogs, as well as children having dogs as companions. And I know that, during the divorce that happened in my family, our two dogs were the best therapists in the world. Infinitely patient, always ready to love you and to be loved, and just a constant source of emotional support. Dogs are amazing in that way. And I'm so thrilled to see dogs take this place in more and more Black homes.